This is the Final Word Cricket podcast with Geoff Lemon and Adam Collins, coming to you from across the world, as it always does. And first thing out of the gates today, this is the week that we got to interview David Lloyd, our white whale in many respects. We've wanted to do this for a while. When I say that, I mean we haven't chased him across the world. We just talked about doing it a few times, and then we asked him and he said yes. So, look, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that difficult. He didn't sink the ship that we were sailing on, spoiler alert. But we do have a long and extremely entertaining conversation with David Lloyd on the show today.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that he's always been someone we've been interested in because he's done so much in the game. Like a lot of former players are commentators, but not many have spliced in coaching the county, coaching the national team, working on radio, working as an umpire. And also that amazing connection he's got to his local club and local area in Accrington. So I think that, he's been someone we've always thought it'd be interesting to go behind the persona we see on television, I guess, and on Twitter and so on. And I reckon that was, mission accomplished. He gave us plenty.
I should also note that I'm recording this show today sitting at a piano, which you might have noticed if you're watching the YouTube video. This is not because I can play the piano. It's just because it's a really convenient height to put the computer on so that I can look down the webcam. But it does make me feel, like I've got some skills that I don't have, There we go.
Well done. That's a recital.
Thank you.
My mum was a piano teacher when I grew up, and I always regret that I never sort of took that on fully. I think if you put me at a piano, the best I could do now is play Jewel Foolish Games, which is like one of the easiest songs to play, and that's about it. So,
at least it's not chopsticks.
No.
Unless you have a giant keyboard to work with, a la young Tom Hanks. Before we get to Mr. Lloyd, quick glance of our eye over a few things that have been going on during the week. The Operation Exit India has, it's halfway through, I suppose, for players leaving the IPL. The Australian players are all in the Maldives, having an island quarantine. The England players have got home. South African players have got home. A few Indian players have gone home and since contracted COVID because they've had to leave the bubble, and so Prasid Krishna's one of those. There's Mike Hussey's tested positive for it, Tim Seifert, the New Zealand wicketkeeper. So the breach has been bigger and more extensive than just the initial cases that saw it shut down.
Yeah, and no surprise once the bubble was breached that it was going to play out this way. A lot's happened since we last sat down and had a conversation about this, I suppose, a week ago. And it highlighted how fraught the whole thing was to begin with. Even take the Mike Hussey positive test and negative test and positive test, and how he contracted it sitting next to somebody on a bus. I mean, it happens so easily, doesn't it? That's been a consistent message through the last 15 months, just how easy it is to get COVID if you're in the presence of somebody who's already positive, even if they aren't displaying symptoms necessarily. So, the Hussey situation's fairly bleak for him personally, because he thought that after submitting a negative test that he might be able to get out to the Maldives as well and get home that way, but he'll have to now stay put for another 10 days and then start the long trip home to Australia. So, yes, it'll be doubly frustrating for him, given that everybody else by that stage will hopefully, fingers crossed, be getting back to Australia when that 14 days concludes, I think on the 15th of May.
15th of May, and there's already some provision for repatriation flights from India, but I guess those who've already gone to a third country will be able to come back under their own steam. Interesting steam coming from the Maldives, with Michael Slater venting his political frustration at the Prime Minister, which is sort of interesting. It's one of these cases where what he's saying is perfectly cromulent, if you will, that you shouldn't be able to, as a government, block your own citizens from coming back into their own country. I think it's also worth noting that Michael Slater has never had a word to say about any political situation before that there was one that directly influenced him. So there's plenty of egregious stuff that if you wanted to get pissed off at the Australian government or the Indian government, where where he goes to work. And so, maybe I balance it up in that context that it's good when prominent people call out bullshit, but it's a little less convincing when it's bullshit that only affects them.
Yeah, and it might be something that gets him in trouble. We've seen reports that Channel 7 aren't too thrilled about the way that Slade has responded to the Prime Minister. And look,
which is hilarious, by the way. Like, as an organisation, having some sort of kind of ethical standpoint, Channel 7 would not necessarily be where you would point in the first instance. Put it that way, with what they're bankrolling in Australia and who they've got employed.
Sure. No, absolutely. What I was going to say was that with international cricketers involved and former players as well, it was always going to highlight the absurdity of locking out citizens from the country. Had it been another country not related to this, I doubt it would be getting this kind of attention. So, I mean, to an extent, well played them for getting this attention to this inconsistency in government policy. But and that political relationship's an important one for Cricket Australia. I note that the National Cabinet has signed off on the Australian players getting vaccines before they go to the West Indies for their one-day tour in what must be August, I reckon. Maybe it's July, actually. July and then the hundreds in August. But they're seen as athletes representing Australia, and of course the Olympic Games are coming up, so they've had to find a way to make it legal for the athletes going to Tokyo to, I hate this term, but jump the queue, and the cricketers will fall into that slipstream. So, yeah, these are important relationships, and it's all balanced on a knife edge at the moment. But I'm sure there'll be plenty more words exchanged between both parties between now and when they eventually get back in the country. Assuming, of course, that is that the travel ban formally lifts when it's said to lift in mid-May. I mean, who's to know? That might be the case that ban extends, and then they're in a different situation where they can either stay in the Maldives, or is it the Maldives? I don't think we've ever quite.
I figured if you go one way, I'll go the other, and then at least we'll split the difference. 50% of us will have been correct.
Yeah, that's right. So. No, the other part of this was that Chinese rocket that allegedly landed in the Maldives, not far away from where the players have been staying, and the ruckus that caused last week, which sounds quite harrowing, really, doesn't it? A rocket landing in this sort of tropical island where they're taking refuge at the moment. Again, that's probably the wrong word as well, taking refuge, but you know what I'm trying to say.
I like to think that it's say an Olympic Games sprinter, from Beijing, say, the Chinese rocket, here he comes, the favourite in the 400 metres, and hopefully doesn't have a crash landing with somebody in the Maldives team.
There's cricket implications for the Indian team as well. So nobody knows how this is going to play out, but I think we can be fairly sure they will get to England in time for the World Test Championship final between the 18th and the 22nd of June at Southampton against New Zealand. I'd be very surprised if they change that from here because of the enormous logistical exercise that it is to put the event on in the first place, and the fact that they're coming to England anyway for Test cricket in August. Now, what they would have done, they would have played the week in Southampton, gone back to India for a few weeks, then returned to England for a tour game, and then the first test on, I think it is the 4th of August. But now they'll have to stay put in the UK. And per what Rahul Dravid has said in the media overnight, that may not be the worst thing, especially if their families can be on that charter flight. They'll get a month, essentially a month, in the UK, where by that stage restrictions would have lifted. They would have already undertaken their quarantine period. They'll be free to mix in the general population. Yeah, they might pop in a couple of extra tour games or however they want to sort it out to prepare them for the England tests. But, I mean, better that than being behind closed doors in lockdown in India where things are so fraught.
Yeah, as far as preparation goes, if you want them to be able to, focus and prepare, then that seems to make sense. The second part of the IPL might be sort of September, October, but none of the England players will be able to go, which is completely expected. There's nothing surprising about that.
Well, when you put it that way, I suppose not. But it wouldn't. I mean, I wouldn't have been staggered either had they found a more diplomatic way of making that point. So Ashley Giles is fairly clear in his media opportunity yesterday that they won't go if it clashes with. I think their commitments are, if I'm right in recalling, some Sri Lanka white ball stuff and the Pakistan trip the Pakistan trip that they're making in October, I think it is. So it's not that they couldn't theoretically skip those white ball series. Players do that all the time. It's more that the England brains trust and the England decision makers are saying, well, actually, this time national duty will come before the IPL. Whereas a couple of months ago, a different decision was potentially going to be made about the IPL against the first Test match against New Zealand. So that is I think an important decision in a way that the ECB are nailing their colours to the mast on this one and saying that irrespective of when this is rescheduled, if it clashes with international duty, you won't be going back to India.
You would assume that it's about goodwill more than anything else, and the goodwill says that those players had a crack. They tried being in the IPL, they went over in good faith, and it didn't work out. And so, fair enough. They've done their best. They can't reasonably be asked to set aside time for it a second time around. And I'd be interested to know what the plans are as far as payment goes. If you've got, players who are promised a certain amount of money, but if they're only available for part of the tournament, then it's pro rata. So if you're bought for $2 million in the auction and you're there for the whole season, even if you don't play, you still get your $2 million. But if you're, as players often are, available for the first 10 games or whatever it is, you get that sort of pro rata percentage of the total amount. So will the players who rocked up for the first edition that was called off get their full pay packet? And what happens when presumably a bunch of other players will need to be drafted in for the second half when a lot of those first choice players aren't available?
Yeah, and I guess that's the subtext of my previous point. If there is a white ball series being set up in Pakistan as planned before the World T20, I think that's how it was sequencing. The England top flight players who are in the IPL might actually think the IPL is a better shout for them. They're better place being in, let's say, Dubai or Abu Dhabi, wherever they might play it. But the ECB, and you can build that case. You can build the argument that if you're going to prepare for a global tournament in short form cricket, why not be playing against the best in the world rather than a bilateral series that's in there for for important reasons, but largely as a thank you for Pakistan coming out to England to play Test cricket in the pandemic season. So and in turn, England could get away with sending a B team, I suppose is what I'm saying. They could probably get away with sending a second-tier team and let the big guns go to the IPL. But, look, a lot of water to go under the bridge, but I thought that was instructive from Ash Giles yesterday.
Pakistan smashed Zimbabwe in the second test in innings and won 47 runs, batted big and then bowled them out twice, making them follow on. A massive game for the Ali clan. If you're of the Ali persuasion, you'd be very happy with how things went. Abid Ali made a double ton. Azhar Ali made 126. Hassan Ali, 5 for 27. And Norman Ali, the left-arm spinner / Seinfeld character, 5 for 86 in the second innings. Shaheen Shah Afridi ruining it by also taking a 5 for in the second innings. I saw I think Cricket Info had a stat that was the first time in 100-odd years that two left-armers had both taken a 5 for in the same innings. Good to know, with the left-arm spinner and the left-arm quick. But just massive times for the Alis across the board.
Yeah, and I think Abid Ali, was he the youngest Pakistani to make a double ton or something like that? Either way,
I'll trust you if you say it.
It's his first double ton in Test cricket, and a player that a lot of investments been made in, not just in Test cricket, but white ball cricket in the last couple of years. Very talented young man. So they've done well there. They've thrashed Zimbabwe twice.
I'd also like to point out, importantly, Norman Ali, the bats down the order, made 97 batting down at number 9. So there've been 17 centuries made at number 9 and Mitchell Stark's 99, and then he slotted in next. So number 19 on that list with 97 from number 9, a pretty handy all-round match.
It's a shame. It would have been good. No, but yeah, the fact that Zimbabwe were beaten so heavily in both Test matches has become more a talking point than Pakistan's performance, I think, there. I mean, the usual suspects like Ramiz Raja and other clickbait merchants have been all over this, saying that there should be... are they arguing for relegation of Zimbabwe? I know certainly with Ramiz...
They've already been relegated. I mean, Zimbabwe got relegated by their own hand and by financial incompetence.
Well, they're not in the WTC, are they? Which is the point here. Yeah. They're not in the World Test Championship. They're outside of that, along with Afghanistan and Ireland. But I think
hardly
the point
anyone
Ramiz
plays
was making...
them anyway. How much more relegated do you want them to get?
Yeah, well, I think... Well, exactly that. Should they be playing Test cricket is the point. So, and this... debate comes up from time to time when there's a heavy defeat of a Bangladesh or Zimbabwe, and I suppose Ireland and Afghanistan, they'll cop this as well as they make their way in Test cricket. It's interesting to me that only a fortnight ago, there was some strong whispers out of the ICC that they might look at having a second division of the WTC, which makes loads of sense to me, because there are, at the moment, 3 teams outside of it, so Zimbabwe, Afghanistan and Ireland, outside of the top 9, that is. So if they found a formal structure for them to play more Test cricket, and they can fold into that the teams that currently have one-day international status and play more first-class cricket against those teams, and just basically giving them more opportunities to play with the red ball following the pandemic, it can only be of benefit when they do come up against the Pakistan. When they do, I mean, last week, Tristan Lavalette, our colleague, who's now writing for Forbes magazine, said that he talked to the guys at Cricket Island, who've said that they have absolutely no idea about this Test match against Australia that's allegedly happening next year. So that does hint that Earl Eddings, who was involved in that, according to Andrew Wu's reporting at the time, that story that was coming out about Earl Eddings, about trying to secure the votes of Cricket Tasmania in relation to him staying on his chair. If Cricket Island don't know about this prospective test a month on, that doesn't augur particularly well for that getting played. But the point here is that if you want to see teams like Zimbabwe, who are in redevelopment mode at the moment, they do need to rejuvenate, no question. They've got to play more Test cricket. You can't expect them to play a few times a year and hope that everything will be okay when they come up against a team like Pakistan, who've had a very good couple of years. So, yes, if there is a way of having some quasi-second division, some formal structure, that can only be a good thing.
Well, it's also worth pointing out that you know who else gets beaten by an innings and plenty? Every team. All the time. Like, all of the big teams get smashed by other big teams, because when you lose in cricket, it's easier than a lot of sports to lose really badly in cricket.
It is.
You get thrashed in a football match, it might be 4-0, but you get thrashed in a cricket match, it's an innings and 200. So, yeah, England got destroyed in India. Does that mean you relegate England? All that kind of stuff. It happens, and it's knee-jerk and not very helpful. There wasn't a lot of cricket to have knee-jerk reactions to in the county championship, because it all got washed out, didn't it? But catch me up on what caught your eye.
Yeah, it didn't quite get washed out in the end. 4 of 8 games got a result, if you like, and 4 draws. And yeah, it's just one of those things. It's the first round we've had badly affected by rain, and it wasn't all over the country. We lost maybe 2.5 hours at Lords. We were quite fortunate, whereas in other parts of the country they lost days. So, but yeah, from an Australian perspective, the fact that Jimmy Anderson picked up Marnus Labuschagne with the 5th ball that he bowled to him in professional cricket was pretty interesting. An absolute jaffa from Jimmy, sort of exactly as you'd expect, moving it away and kissing the edge of Labuschagne, and off he goes for 12. So 2 failures for Labuschagne to start his season with Glamorgan. In that same game, Michael Neser made his debut. So we don't get to see Michael Neser bowl an awful lot when Queensland aren't playing. He's usually just kind of the permanent 12th man for Australia. But he took 2 for 50. But at one stage, he'd bowled 9 overs, 8 maidens, 1 for 1, which is very Michael Neser energy there up against Lancashire. Peter Hanscom's having a shocker at the moment, I'm afraid to say, at Middlesex. He's made, I think I'm right in saying, 31 runs in 5 innings so far to start. And they got beaten heavily by Ian Harvey's team at Gloucestershire. So the Freak took over as coach in like a month before the season started because of an appointment the ECB made. Richard Dawson got promoted to take over the Lions. And yes, he's gone from assistant coach to coach, and now they're leading the group. They've won 4, drawn 1. And sure, they've been promoted at the end of 2019, and they were going back to Division 1, but they've never won it. The best they've ever done is coming second in 1986, and they've beaten everyone with the exception of Hampshire, who they had a draw against. So it's pretty exciting for them. And yeah, they pumped Middlesex at Lords.
My favourite team, Gloucestershire. That's
yes.
I'm on.
Get on
Freaks.
board.
Let's barrack the Freaks all the way to.
You should final. It's the perfect bandwagon for you to get on, Geoff, because they're playing wonderful cricket. David Payne, who's been opening the bowling there since 2009, had never taken a 10-wicket haul ever. Very consistent, but never had got. He took 11 for 86 at Lords, and it was the week after he'd missed a game for the birth of his first child. So a nice little second thread running through the course of that game. Another quirky stats thing that you'll love, that nearly came to fruition. You may have seen it on Daniel Norcross's Twitter feed. No. Get this. Northants Sussex, a game that Northants won comfortably because they bowled out Sussex on the first day for about 100, and they ended up winning by an innings. But the bit that was relevant was that in the first innings, that Sussex, where they were bowled out for 106, Gareth Berg and Ben Sanderson took 5 wickets each. And in the second innings, at one stage, Sanderson had 5 and Berg had 4, and they were on their way to taking 5, 5, 5, 5. And unfortunately, there was a change made. Tom Taylor came on and picked up the last wicket, and it denied Northants from having that analysis. And Andrew Sampson worked out it would have been the 21st time in over 60,000 first-class games where 2 bowlers had gone 5, 5, 5, 5 in a first-class fixture. So I felt robbed by that.
Oh, I mean, Tom Taylor, get out of here. Get out of here. No, that's, whoever brought him on deserves to be hauled up in front of a tribunal.
Adam Rossington, who came back after missing the previous game with a broken finger, he made that call. Speaking of Northants, by the way, they're right up there. They've won a couple of games, and much like Gloucestershire, I hate this term, but kind of the unfashionable counties who've both started this campaign really well. There's an alternative approach which Worcestershire are taking, Geoff. They've played 5 games for 5 draws, and because the draw's worth more points this year, I think they're 1 point out of second, which would get them into the top division. So if you just want to draw every game, you can just about get yourself in contention to win the trophy. And the last thing I'll note on the way through is that from an Ashes perspective, Craig Overton is having a ridiculous couple of years. He made 74 for Somerset in their win against Hampshire, and across both innings he picked up 7 for 82 from 51 overs. So super effective and really efficient as well. That means since the start of the Bob Willis Trophy last year, he's averaging 33 with the bat and 13.7 with the ball. So everyone's talking about Ollie Robinson for obvious reasons as being kind of the next cab off the rank for England, and he might play against New Zealand later in the month, who's to know. But I think Craig Overton's giving himself a chance to be in that squad as well.
Well, if England rock up for the Ashes with a bowling attack of Broad, Anderson and Overton, that would be a real shake-up, wouldn't it? Just something new, something fresh.
I don't think it would come to that. I reckon it might be sort of like Wood, Archer, Anderson, Broad sort of sharing a lot of the load between them, and then sort of Robinson and Wokes and Overton being all in the mix as well. I missed one last Australian angle, by the way. Marcus Harris made a ton for Leicestershire against Surrey. Okay. It's his first 100 of the season for I suppose he's the incumbent Australian opener because he played that final test at Brisbane against India. So, not as much to recap this week in the Championship, but there's a couple of tidbits to keep you going, Geoff.
Very nice. Now, just before we get to Bumble, a quick little bit of Nerd Pledge. The game that we play with the lovely people on our Patreon page. They support the show by sending us an amount of currency, but not a normal amount of currency, an amount that is a number that relates to cricket in some way, and we have to work out what that is.
Yes, right. So the first one we have this week is from Scott Munroe with 417. The clue is, it's not bowling figures. It's a bowler I share a birthday with. Not the same age, but I think you guys will get it. I had all these great intentions of spending my weekend going through these Nerd Pledge numbers because our game was picked up by Sky Television. Instead of calling the entire day in, day out, 96 overs, it was more sort of conventional approach where I'd do a stint and, sit around for an hour and consider my options. Have a sandwich. And I meant to go and work all these out in one of my breaks from the broadcast, but I didn't. So I looked at these notes in despair this morning, but I'm glad that you have had a look at the birthday that might be relevant to Scott Munroe.
I'd already got there. So $4.17 for Scott Munroe, presumably meaning the 17th of April, 417. You don't have to give us a gimme sort of clue like Scott did. You can if you want. You don't have to. So telling me that it's a cricketer who Scott shares a birthday with. As far as cricketers born on that day, there are some hot options here, some candidates. Not bowlers necessarily, but Alex Ross, the pride of Canberra, wasn't he? Before going across to the
sweepologist, wasn't he? I used to call him on the on the Big Bash broadcast.
A New Zealand first-class cricketer in the 1920s named Robert Menzies, which I thought would tickle you.
Bob getting his miles in before crossing over. I think we mentioned him on the show the other week in relation to one of our dusty old bastards, actually. So 2 mentions for Bob Menzies in the space of a month. Yeah,
I wonder if he drove his car into the grandstand at the cricket ground in order to, like he did when he went to see Carlton play at the footy. The great the great Nyomal Geomal, who was the very first Indian Test match opening batsman way back in the 1930s. Norman Cowans, who we've talked about on the show a bit before as well, and another New Zealander, Roger Twose. Roger Twose, always a satisfying name to say, Twose, Twose.
Yes, one of the stars of the 99 World Cup. Roger Twose. We at one stage were hoping to get him on, but we ended up getting Geoff to speak to us instead, who led the wicket takers. But Roger Twose smashed Australia everywhere. It was at Cardiff, wasn't it? That I think he pop Warney into the River Taff or something like that. But yes, anyway, as you say, a satisfying name and player from that era.
Yes, on the Roger ones and the Roger twos. The more prominent name among April 17 cricketing birthdays, though, is Matthias Muralitharan, and I think that's probably where we're going for Scott Munroe. Sometimes I just like to go and look at Murali's numbers, just like the way you might go and look at a nice painting on your wall, because you look at something like a measure like 5-wicket hauls in Test cricket, for instance, and a couple of players I've been keeping my eye on recently, Ravichandran Ashwin and James Anderson, dueling it out, level pegging. They've got 30 apiece. 30 times they've taken 5 wickets in an innings. Rangana Herath, 34. Anil Kumble, 35. Richard Hadley, 36. Shane Warne, 37. These are the greats of the game. 37 for Shane Warne. He's number 2. Number 1, Murali, 67 times. 67. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, what was what was the guy made of? Like, how did he do this? How did he possibly...
I think the counterpoint would be that he bowled half of Sri Lanka's overs, so therefore he probably should have taken half the wickets. But you're right, it is an amazing feat to think that he was fit enough and resilient enough to keep doing it for as long as he did.
But the fact that he bowled half the overs as well, look, there are about a dozen players in Test cricket who bowled 4,000 overs or more, right? There are 5 players who got above 5,000. There are 3 who got above 6,000. And then there's Murali, 7,500 overs that he sent down in Test cricket. 7,339.5 overs, to be precise. How on earth does that happen? Like, aside from just how freakishly good he was, how freakishly resilient he was and how durable he was, I think is something that will never cease to be staggering to me.
Yeah, and I think one day, from an Australian perspective, there should be a reconciliation of sorts with Murali based on everything that he went through as a younger man, especially when coming out in 1995 and then again in 1998 on both tours where he was called for throwing. Now, I know there's a lot of debate that goes on around that, but the fact that if you want to look on YouTube and see when Channel 4 actually tested Murali bowling in a brace that could not go cast. A fiberglass cast. That's right. And Vish wrote about this as well, by the way, in the Cricket Monthly. A brilliant piece of writing that I strongly urge people to go and have a look at some point. But it became almost a national obsession, Geoff, when we were kids. And I got sucked up in it. I'm not going to pretend that I wasn't part of this. As a sort of 10 or 12-year-old, it was like, no ball and all the rest of it. And that's embarrassing now because I realised that I was being sucked into something else altogether that I didn't understand then, but I do understand now. And it's a shame that it took... you still hear it, don't you? You see on Twitter, if you talk about Murali, you'll still see, eggs on Twitter with lots of numbers afterwards, or maybe a car in their profile, who'll immediately respond by calling him a chucker or something worse. And, the fact that the Prime Minister weighed in at the time and gave his two cents worth on that, I think at some point there might be some way to reconcile all of that.
Yep. It's probably mostly people of a certain age who have that particular fixation as well. And also the thing of, he took all these wickets against Bangladesh and Zimbabwe. He did take a bunch of wickets against them. You know why? Because Sri Lanka actually played Bangladesh and Zimbabwe. Australia have refused to again and again. So, one team did its job as a cricket citizen. So that's the birthday on the 17th of April. Others with that birthday include Jennifer Garner, Posh Spice, Rooney Mara and Sean Bean, none of whom were prominent as bowlers.
No, they were not. They were not. Okay, so that's the first number dealt with. Scott Munroe. Had 3 goes at that. 417. Shane Fagg's 1219 has a clue as well. Thank you, Shane. That relates to one of his all-time favourites. Geoff, there might be a link here.
Yeah, $12.19. Thank you, Shane. Very sporting of you. And the first thing I thought of, because we don't fiddle with the order of the numbers, they come in the order that they come in. But when I saw this, I thought, hang on a second. What if this is a birthday as well? 1219. You know who was born on December 19? Ricardo Ponting. And he is perfectly placed to be an all-time favourite of someone who is presumably Australian and enjoys this show. So I'm going to go double birthday. We normally don't do birthdays. We've only done this once or twice before that a number has linked to a birthday. But today, 2 numbers, 2 birthdays.
Yeah, I think the last time we did it was for Justin Langer, who also has an April birthday. But why not 2 birthdays? So we went back and had a look at when Ricky played on his birthday. And you'd think he would have played more, really, given that his birthday's in the middle of the Australian summer. But not loads. A couple of test matches, one in 2000 against the West Indies when he made 11 on his birthday. He made 38.
That's an auspicious number for Ricky, because that was his highest score on the India tour of 2001 when he made 11. I think from memory it was 0-6, 0-0-11. And when he made the 11, he was dropped twice on 0. Just
noted, yes,
just
that's
some
right.
Extra colour for you.
Yeah. 32 against South Africa in 2008 at Perth, which of course was the test match where South Africa set a new record for chasing in the 4th innings, or at least the highest score in Australia in the 4th innings, I should say.
No, I think it was the highest at the time, wasn't it? It was 414, and then the West Indies went on to... Oh, no, yeah.
No,
right.
it's the other way around, yeah. They'd already set 418 or made 418 in
418,
Antigua in 2003. In one-day internationals, he actually batted in a one-dayer on his 21st birthday.
Okay.
That was also against the Windies in 1995. He only made 6, unfortunately, at the MCG. It was his 8th one-dayer, which came a week after his famous test debut when he was out league before wicket for 96 or 97, 96. If I recall correctly, 96. At Shield level, how's this? He made, on his 18th birthday, he made 25 in 1992 against Western Australia. Now, why this is interesting to me is that Terry Alderman was playing for Western Australia that week. And you go back and look, Terry Alderman debuted back in November 1974, which was a month before Ponting was born. On the 19th of December 1974. Whoa. So I was interested in looking at the span. So you got that enormous amount of time gathered there, 18 years. On the other side of it, Ricky finishes his first-class career 21 years later in 2013 for Surrey. And I wonder who will be the link in that chain. So there'll be Alderman to Ponting, and then Ponting to somebody who might have played with him in that Surrey team. Someone like Rory Burns would have been about 21 or thereabouts then. If Rory Burns goes on and plays for 2 decades till he's 40-odd, then I wonder who he'll link it through. It's the circle of first-class cricket life. It's the Wheel of Fortune.
1974 through to 2030-something. To the heat death of the planet. And that's Nerd Pledge. If you want to play the game, it's very easy. You just go to patreon.com/thefinalword and you send us your number. And in doing so, you help support the show and we get to keep making it twice a week. We do the history show on the weekend and this show in the middle of the week. Let's take the mid-show breather and then it'll be David Lloyd.
Geoff, before we go to our feature interview, a word for our dear friends at Woodstock Cricket. We talked about them a few weeks ago and our new relationship between them and The Final Word and the very healthy discount we have for our listeners, 20% off. But they are fine bats indeed. I'm going to go up to Nottingham the week after next and go into the showroom and get the full Woodstock experience from start to end. So it takes about an hour for them to work out which bat you should use. So I've been on their website looking through, and I reckon I want the one called the Festival, which is their T20 bat. It looks splendid with the purple and yellow stickers and all the rest of it. So I can't wait to have that in my hands. But they've just gone 1-2 in the Good Gear Guide, so they've quinelled it. That 2 of their bats have finished first and second in independently verified competition, which is pretty cool. That's all done blind testing, so you know the judges don't know they're holding a Woodstock. And that reinforces that these are pretty amazing bits of kit with more pros using them than ever before, and as will you and me in our games that we play too.
Much, much more badly. As far as winning, something that says you've made the best thing in that category, that's a pretty significant thing to do when people who know what they're talking about do the gauging and the judging of a piece of equipment and say, this is the best one. If you win the best one and the second best one, you really got to be making some pretty good shit. That's not like you haven't just fluked it into number one. They're like, no, you're the best and the best one after that before anybody else gets in the door. So they're beautiful pieces of equipment. I've also been looking through the website and trying to work out what I want to use and feeling like it's kind of a shame, really, that it will end up in my hands because, there are better fates. If you're a cricket bat, there are fates that you deserve more than others. But, something... I'm like, what's the best bat to play with on AstroTurf? What's your AstroTurf specialist? But they've got all the other...
Yeah, they've got all these kicks. They've been around for a long time. So they've had a big rebrand in the last year or so. And so the bats look differently. You may have seen them in the past, but the logo and all that has been revamped. So it's like they're having a rebirth of sorts at the moment with all this positive attention. And it's why we were, so keen to be part of the journey they're on at the moment. They've signed some new players recently. So Sheldon Cottrell, the West Indies, I was going to call him an all-rounder, but certainly a well-known player. Stephen Finn, the former England international, who's now at Middlesex, of course, playing for Middlesex. He always has, but he doesn't play for England at the moment, but he has one of those beautiful Woodstock bats. Mark Adair from Ireland. Ricky Vessels, son of... playing in the first-class system as well. So lots of people, and I gather around the circuit, all the talk's been, wow, these bats look good. How do I get myself one of these? And fair enough too, because they do just look delightful.
And they've got all the other kit as well. What I quite liked about it was there aren't 400 different kinds of pads and gloves you can get. There are a couple of different types of things depending on what your requirements are, but it's as straightforward as it can be. And then where you can get very niches with the bat, exactly what you want your bat to be like. But they're gorgeous pieces of equipment and they're affordable because you can get 20% off the retail price. So you go to woodstock.co.uk, you buy something, and at the checkout you put in TFW 20, which is the final word, 20. That'll be in the show notes. Scroll down to refresh your memories and go and buy yourself some really nice kit.